On January 1st, 1863, Abraham Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation officially allowed blacks to fight in the United States military. This was the first time in American history that black men could fight for the country that they lived and worked in, although they did not share the same freedoms as their fellow soldiers of other races. They fought with a tenacity and bravery that could not be matched. By the 1930s, several black units have managed to etch their names into the history books. Units like the Harlem Hellfighters and others really began to show the fighting spirits of blacks when defending their country. By the end of the First World War, two areas of the military were barred from blacks to enter: the Air Corps, later called the Air Force, and the Tank Corps. In the time between the First and Second World Wars, those barriers would slowly be torn down and lead to some of the most heroic stories of the Second World War. During the Second World War, the Allied commanders had devised a new way to defeat their enemies through the air. This new strategy was called strategic bombing. Hundreds of slow, lumbering bombers would take off from England and fly into the heart of Germany to disrupt manufacturing by bombing factories, airfields, and bases. The only issue was that these bombers were very difficult to protect, and they outranged many of the fighter escorts of the time. The Air Command for the U.S. Air Corps needed a solution to this problem, and fast, as hundreds of men were being killed in these mass bombing missions, and fighter pilots were becoming a rarity. The solution was a new idea in the form of allowing black men to join the Air Corps and fly as fighter escorts. Their focus, rather than chasing glory in downed aircraft, would be instead to protect the bomber streams. On the 22nd of March, 1941, the 99th Pursuit Squadron was activated with no pilots and later moved to Tuskegee, Alabama to take on nearly 600 men for training. The first class of trained pilots graduated on the 19th of July, and from this, all other black fighter groups were formed, including the 100th, 301st, and 302nd Fighter Squadrons. Although all this progress had been made, there were still boundaries based on the Jim Crow mentality of the South. General Hap Arnold even touched on the squadron, saying Negro pilots cannot be used in our present Air Corps, since this would result in Negro officers serving over white enlisted men, creating an impossible social situation. The units of black airmen were still mostly segregated from the rest of the Army, and only had their white officers who truly saw these men for who they really were. By 1943, the air group had moved into a combat role in Italy. This was their first deployment, and they swiftly gained an outstanding reputation. This success was also met with resistance from their white counterparts. The white commanders fought against the integration of the unit heavily. During a movie being shown at the base, Major Frank O'Driscoll Hunter forced the men to segregate, even though there were new orders forbidding segregation. This was only a small taste of the tension to come, though, as in 1945, with the war nearing its end, a mutiny occurred at Freeman Field in Seymour, Indiana. Black officers attempted to integrate into an all-white officers' club. These officers were refused service and removed from the club. After a short scuffle, over 162 arrests were made on black officers, and some of them had even been arrested twice. Eventually, though, all of the charges, save for 3, were dropped, and all non-black officers were forced to sign a document stating that they had read the new regulations of non-segregation. Back in Europe, the rest of the now named 332nd Expeditionary Operations Group were hard at work protecting the bomber streams heading into Germany. These men faced some of the most battle-hardened pilots in the world, as well as some of the most technologically advanced aircraft of the time. The 332nd and their P-51Cs and Ds had to take on the infamous Messerschmitt Bf-109s, Focke-Wulf 190s, and even the newest aircraft to enter combat in the very first combat jet fighter ever, the legendary Me-262. These battles raged at 30,000 feet, where there was little oxygen and the cold from the moving air could freeze up control surfaces of their aircraft. Although these new pilots faced incredible opposition, they managed to stay with their bombers and keep them protected. The bomber crews nicknamed these pilots the Red-Tailed Angels, due to their outstanding devotion to keep the lumbering bombers safe and the red markings on their tails. This nickname would eventually lead to the now famous name, the Red Tails. By the end of the war, the Red Tails had taken part in an impressive 1,578 combat missions. 179 of those combat missions were bomber escort missions, and astoundingly, they only lost a combined total of 27 bombers across 7 missions. That number was incredibly low compared to their white counterparts' average of 46 lost bombers. Although these men had proven themselves in combat over Germany, when the war ended, many would return to find that nothing had changed in the United States. Jim Crow laws were still being supported in southern states, and racism was still prevalent. The unit was disbanded in 1948, but many of the pilots continued to fight against racism. This unit was a major reason that in 1948, President Truman, with Executive Order 9981, ended military segregation. Many of the pilots continued careers in aviation, and even some continued their careers in the military. On November 18, 2016, the last surviving member of the original class of airmen passed away due to a stroke. The unit received many citations and medals, including 1 Silver Star, 96 Distinguished Flying Crosses, 14 Bronze Stars, 744 Air Medals, and 8 Purple Hearts. The unit had also destroyed 410 enemy aircraft, including 3 Me-262 fighter jets. Down on the ground, though, another unit was battling racism as well as the enemy. This unit was known as the 761st Tank Battalion, also known as the Black Panthers. These men suffered the same discrimination as their aviator counterparts. During their training, the 761st had to train in the Deep South, and on the 10th of January 1942, the unit engaged in a bloody riot against a white tank unit that neighbored them. The riot ended after several members of the 761st commandeered several M4 Sherman tanks as well as half-tracks. These men were eventually persuaded to stand down, though, by a Lieutenant Colonel Bates, who promised to straighten out the situation. One of the most famous men of the 761st was a First Lieutenant Jack Roosevelt, or Jackie Robinson. Before his baseball career, Jackie was an officer within the Tank Battalion. He lost his post, though, after being arrested when told to move from the front of a non-segregated bus to the back. The commanding officer refused to charge Jackie with a court-martial and instead transferred Jackie to the 758th, where he was then charged, but acquitted of all charges. The 761st saw some of the most brutal action of the war, fighting against some of the most fearsome tanks of the Second World War. Tanks like the Tiger I, Tiger II, and Panzer IV. They fought through 183 days of non-stop action through towns like Montvic, Vic-sur-Celle, and Morville-les-Vic. Although they took on some of the most heavy fighting, the unit only suffered 24 men killed in combat. One such man killed was Staff Sergeant Reuben Rivers. Rivers had led a daylight attack in an attempt to clear a roadblock. He jumped from his tank and attached a cable to a fallen tree to open up a road so that the unit could advance. The entire time, Rivers was under intense small arms gunfire, and a week later, Rivers led another attack where this time he wouldn't be so lucky. His tank ran over a mine, which exploded and left a massive cut in his leg, all the way down to the bone. After being ordered to retreat, Rivers told his captain, "Sir, this is one order, the only order I'll ever disobey." He was then transferred to another tank to provide covering fire for the rest of the company. Even after a full 24-hour day of fighting, Rivers refused medical attention and continued to attack. Eventually, Rivers' tank was hit by 2 high-explosive shells. One managed to penetrate the tank and killed Rivers instantly. Unfortunately, Reuben Rivers would not receive the Medal of Honor for his actions until 1993. A consensus has been that this is due to him being black and white officers downplaying his actions. As the Battle of the Bulge began, General George S. Patton called upon the 761st to smash through the German counterattack, to rush into Bastogne to save the encircled 101st Airborne. This unit made it through the German attack and relieved the white troopers just as they were running out of supplies. After the war, the unit returned to the United States, though, like the Tuskegee Airmen, the welcome was not warm. They again faced similar discrimination as they did before leaving. The 761st actions also fed into the government's decision to desegregate the military. The 761st Tank Battalion was awarded 4 campaign streamers, as well as a Presidential Unit Citation. They also received 296 Purple Hearts, 11 Silver Stars, and 69 Bronze Stars. The men in these units grew up during the Harlem Renaissance. Much like in the novels we read in class, these men had to find their voices and fight to gain the respect of their fellow soldiers. The most recent example of this I can think of is much like Genie in Their Eyes Were Watching God. They had to become strong and to show the world that they could handle themselves. They stuck together and fought the naysayers, and although many at the time said that they were either too stupid or just plain incapable, these men proved to the world that blacks are just as capable as a white man. They followed the words of men before them like Booker T. Washington and learned how to become better citizens so that they could one day end racism through their heroics. Before I end this video, I want to add a couple last-minute facts. In the time that you've been watching this video, Tuskegee Airman Lee Archer shot down 3 BF-109 fighters over Lake Balaton, earning him the title of Ace. Also, on September 16th, 2019, the United States Air Force announced a new trainer jet for their fighter pilots. This jet is called the T-7A Red Hawk. It is a top-of-the-line trainer that sports the legendary red tail in homage to the Tuskegee Airmen. Thanks for watching, everyone.